On the evening of June 14th, in the town of Brookhaven Ridge, 38-year-old Matthew Carter called 911. His voice was tight, clipped with panic. He reported that his wife, Laura Carter, had gone missing earlier that morning after supposedly leaving for a run at the nearby Greenway Trail. Laura's shoes, phone, and wallet were found on the kitchen counter. The house showed no signs of forced entry. To responding officers, Matthew appeared deeply shaken, answering questions between fits of nervous pacing. Within 24 hours, the Brookhaven Police Department issued a formal missing persons bulletin. Laura, a well-known and well-liked ER nurse at County Memorial, was not someone who would disappear without warning. Her co-workers described her as reliable, deeply rooted in her routines, and unlikely to abandon her life without a trace. Matthew gave interviews to local news outlets, appealing tearfully for Laura's safe return. He organized search parties, printing flyers at his own expense. Neighbors and colleagues praised his devotion, but a few, speaking more cautiously, mentioned that the Carters' marriage had become strained over the past year. Arguments over money, long hospital shifts, and Matthew's frequent business trips that seemed to fall on weekends. Detectives assigned to the case found one early anomaly. No one, including traffic cameras at all trail entrances, recorded Laura running that morning. As far as the evidence showed, she never left the house at all. A detective noted a second oddity. While searching the house, Matthew had volunteered to show them her closet, her drawers, even her side of the bathroom sink, but seemed unusually reluctant to allow them access to the garage. On the second day of the investigation, Detective Aaron Holloway formally requested access to the Carter garage. Matthew hesitated, citing disorganization and embarrassment over its mess. The excuse didn't sit right with Holloway. Following protocol, she obtained a search warrant. When officers entered the garage, they found it oddly sparse, not the chaotic jumble Matthew described. Cardboard boxes lined the walls. A workbench stood cleared, but for a few tools, and at the far end, an industrial-sized chest freezer hummed steadily. It was padlocked. When asked about it, Matthew claimed it contained old hunting meat from trips he had taken with friends. Yet under questioning, he could not name dates, locations, or even who had been with him on these supposed trips. His answers grew increasingly fragmented, defensive. Officers logged the freezer as evidence, but without immediate probable cause for forced entry, were required to wait for a specialized forensic team. Meanwhile, detectives widened their focus. Laura's phone records showed no unusual activity in the days before her disappearance. No calls to unknown numbers, no texts suggesting she planned to leave. On the other hand, Matthew's phone showed frequent late-night communications with a woman listed only as R in his contacts. Subpoenaed phone data revealed that R was Rachel Monroe, a woman Matthew had known for over a year, not a casual acquaintance, but a secret affair partner. Further digging uncovered that Rachel had recently rented a detached garage behind her suburban duplex. Detectives paid Rachel a visit under the pretense of following up on neighborhood canvassing. She seemed polite but nervous, reluctant to let them onto the property. Through a crack in the garage door, Detective Holloway glimpsed another deep freezer, this one identical in make and model to the one found at the Carters' home. The team now faced the chilling realization. There might be not just one freezer of interest, but two. Rachel, confronted with questions she hadn't anticipated, stumbled through her answers. She claimed she had no key to the garage, that it was used solely for storage, yet her behavior, rapid blinking, shifting weight, tightness in her throat, betrayed deep anxiety. Detectives pressed for a warrant to open both freezers. Time, they knew, was critical. By Friday afternoon, the warrants were signed. Detective Holloway assembled a small forensic team to meet simultaneously at both locations, minimizing any chance of evidence being tampered with. At the Carter residence, officers cut the padlock from the garage freezer. The heavy lid creaked open, releasing a rush of stale, chemical-laced cold air. Inside were slabs of frozen venison and fish, precisely what Matthew had claimed. A surface check yielded nothing unusual. For a moment, tension lifted, until forensic technician Marcus Levin, sweeping the freezer's seams with a blacklight, found several minute blood traces at the rubber gasket near the lid. Samples were immediately collected for DNA analysis. Meanwhile, at Rachel Monroe's rented garage, the situation escalated faster. As officers opened the second freezer, they froze. Beneath a shallow layer of frozen vegetables and packing material, the unmistakable outline of a human form emerged. Legs curled tightly to the chest, arms twisted unnaturally. The body, hastily wrapped in trash bags and duct tape, was partially frozen but showed early signs of decomposition. A delicate chain, one Laura was known to wear daily, was still clasped around the neck. The crime scene was sealed. Rachel Monroe, who had been watching nervously from her porch, was immediately taken into custody for questioning. Her demeanor crumbled within minutes. Tears, trembling hands, incoherent denials. She insisted she didn't know how the body got there. At the police station, Matthew was brought in under pretense of new developments and separately placed in an interview room. Surveillance cameras captured his visible flinch when officers told him a body had been recovered. He asked for a lawyer without further comment. Forensic analysis confirmed that the body was Laura Carter. Cause of death was not immediately obvious. No clear gunshot or stabbing wounds, but lividity patterns suggested she had died face down, possibly due to blunt force trauma or asphyxiation. The shock reverberated through Brookhaven Ridge. News helicopters circled overhead. The tidy narrative Matthew had woven collapsed in hours, replaced by a cold, horrifying reality that demanded answers and accountability. The Brookhaven County Medical Examiner's Office moved swiftly. Dr. Adrian Voss, the chief pathologist, performed Laura Carter's autopsy early the next morning. The results painted a grim but incomplete picture. Multiple contusions on Laura's head and neck, consistent with blunt force trauma, but not immediately fatal. The true cause of death was listed as mechanical asphyxiation. Laura had been strangled, manually, and with significant force. Defensive wounds on her hands suggested she had fought fiercely for her life. The estimated time of death placed Laura's killing sometime late Monday night, nearly a full day before Matthew claimed she had gone jogging. This directly contradicted his entire timeline. Detectives Holloway and Ramirez methodically reconstructed Matthew's and Rachel's activities. Cell phone records showed a flurry of messages between them that night, abrupt and panicked in tone, until both phones went silent around 1 a.m. Surveillance from a gas station 4 blocks from Rachel's home captured Matthew's car around 2 a.m., heavily loaded with something in the trunk, though the footage was too grainy to make out specifics. Confronted with mounting evidence, Rachel Monroe finally cracked during her third interview. In a broken voice, she admitted that Matthew had shown up at her home unexpectedly, frantic and covered in bruises and scratches. He had a package, Laura's body, already lifeless. Rachel claimed she had no part in Laura's death, but agreed, in terror and confusion, to let him store the body temporarily in her rented garage. Matthew, she said, promised it was just until he figured things out. Rachel's confession, while self-serving, was consistent with the physical evidence. There were no signs that Laura had been killed at Rachel's property. Everything pointed back to the Carters' own home. Detectives now had to move carefully. The public image of Matthew, the grieving, desperate husband, was already beginning to fracture in the eyes of the community. But what they needed was hard evidence, not just inconsistencies and character collapses. A search warrant was expanded to re-examine the Carter house, this time with full forensic teams combing every inch: carpets, floorboards, walls, drains. Holloway's team was convinced the key to the entire case, and to securing a murder charge, lay somewhere within the place Laura had called home. Detective Holloway returned to the Carter residence with a new team of forensic specialists and a much broader warrant. Every inch of the house would be examined. Matthew, who had already lawyered up, had moved into a hotel, leaving the property accessible without obstruction. Inside, the team began systematically processing the master bedroom. Luminol tests quickly revealed a different story than the clean, orderly surface suggested. Under ultraviolet light, faint traces of blood bloomed across the carpet near the foot of the bed, inconsistent with minor injuries or accidents. Further swabbing and chemical tests indicated multiple impacts, pooling patterns suggesting a body had lain there for some time before being moved. Near the ensuite bathroom, behind the baseboard molding, technicians found a small smear of blood. It had been hastily wiped, but not completely. DNA analysis confirmed the blood belonged to Laura Carter. The forensic evidence strongly suggested Laura had been attacked in the bedroom, sustained blunt force injuries, and was then suffocated, most likely with a pillow or manual pressure, before being hidden temporarily. Drag marks, invisible to the naked eye but revealed through forensic powder, traced a path from the bedroom to the garage. This discovery led investigators to conclude that Laura had died at home and that Matthew had stored her body, even if briefly, inside the garage freezer before moving it to Rachel Monroe's property. Rachel, meanwhile, faced another round of questioning. This time, investigators focused specifically on the hours after Laura's death. Rachel admitted Matthew had arrived in the middle of the night, panicked and aggressive. She said he threatened to ruin her if she didn't cooperate. Vague language, but filled with enough fear to make her comply without fully questioning him. Rachel also revealed that after storing the body, Matthew instructed her to act normal, continue working, and avoid answering any unexpected calls. She provided her phone to investigators, who found several unsent draft messages to friends, signs she had been debating coming forward earlier but ultimately froze, trapped between fear and complicity. With mounting physical evidence and Rachel's partial confession, prosecutors grew confident they could charge Matthew not just with evidence tampering or obstruction, but first-degree murder, provided they could solidify one last point, proving premeditation, not just panic. The digital forensic team began with Matthew Carter's personal laptop and 2 cell phones recovered during the initial search. His devices were encrypted, but within 48 hours, specialists cracked the security and began reconstructing his activities leading up to Laura's death. What they found stripped away any lingering ambiguity. 2 weeks before Laura's murder, Matthew had made multiple online searches about how to break into a locked phone, how long does it take for a body to freeze, and how to dispose of a body without getting caught. In private browser tabs, he researched local rental spaces, storage units, freezers for sale, and DIY home renovation tips about removing blood stains from carpets. Perhaps most damning was a draft email, never sent, found deep in the recycle bin of his laptop. It read simply, "Soon we'll be free. Everything will be ours. Just trust me." The timestamp placed it 3 days before Laura's death. The recipient was Rachel Monroe's email address. Detectives also found Matthew had ordered extra-strength cleaning supplies and plastic sheeting from a local hardware store 3 days prior. A receipt confirmed the purchase. Surveillance footage corroborated his presence at the store. The materials were consistent with those later found in Rachel's garage. Rachel, re-interviewed under a limited immunity agreement, admitted that Matthew had floated what-if scenarios about Laura disappearing. She thought, or convinced herself to think, it was fantasy talk. In hindsight, she realized he had been preparing her psychologically for what he planned to do. The final forensic report on the Carter house connected the blood evidence conclusively to Laura. Trace fibers matching her clothing were found embedded in the garage floor mat, suggesting her body had been dragged and handled there. With overwhelming physical, digital, and testimonial evidence, detectives prepared an arrest warrant charging Matthew Carter with first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and abuse of a corpse. Before moving to arrest, however, Holloway knew they had to find Matthew. His hotel room, checked that afternoon, was empty. He had left sometime during the night, his car still parked in the lot, but his personal belongings missing. A fugitive search was quietly initiated. The clock, once seemingly frozen around Laura Carter's disappearance, now raced forward, every hour increasing the risk Matthew might escape, or worse, lash out violently once more. The manhunt for Matthew Carter officially launched at dawn. Local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies were alerted. His photograph, vehicle description, and a warning that he might be armed and dangerous were sent to patrols across the region. Detective Holloway's team worked the phones, tracing every lead, old college friends, family members, former colleagues. No one had heard from him, or at least no one admitted to it. His bank accounts showed no recent activity. His cell phone, once a trove of damning evidence, now sat useless. It had been abandoned in his hotel room, wiped clean. Meanwhile, Rachel Monroe remained under protective custody. She described Matthew as calm but determined during their last in-person meeting, warning her that people would understand once it was all over. Rachel interpreted it then as emotional desperation. Now it sounded more like a threat. By late afternoon, a surveillance breakthrough arrived. Traffic cameras caught a man matching Matthew's description boarding a regional bus headed eastbound, not toward major cities, but toward rural areas along the state border. He carried only a small duffel bag. Analysts speculated he was heading for a safe house, or to disappear into less populated areas where law enforcement presence would be thinner. The Brookhaven Police Department faced pressure from the media. Reporters swarmed the station, demanding answers about how a murder suspect managed to vanish under their watch. Holloway, forced to address the situation at a press conference, carefully framed the escape as temporary and emphasized confidence in a swift capture. Behind the scenes, however, tensions ran high. Holloway knew fugitives in emotional collapse were volatile. Matthew Carter, once a respected schoolteacher with no criminal record, had crossed an irreversible line. Cornered, he might react unpredictably. A warrant for nationwide extradition was signed by a judge. Teams were deployed to gas stations, bus stops, motels, anywhere someone fleeing might seek shelter. An emergency alert went out to the public, asking for any sightings. By midnight, a tip came in from a motel owner 2 counties away. A man resembling Matthew had checked into a room under a fake name, paying cash. When officers arrived hours later, the room was already abandoned. But CCTV footage showed Matthew slipping into a wooded area behind the property, wearing a baseball cap and carrying his duffel bag. The chase had moved from the highways into the forests, and it would only get darker from here. At sunrise, law enforcement began combing the dense woodland surrounding the abandoned motel. Officers from multiple counties, K-9 units, and drone teams coordinated across a 5-mile radius. A mobile command center was set up at a nearby church parking lot. Detective Holloway met with FBI profiler Dr. Lance Mercer, who specialized in fugitive behavior. Mercer's analysis was grim. Matthew Carter, facing inevitable capture and complete public disgrace, was at high risk of either suicide or taking a hostage if cornered. "He's not running toward freedom," Mercer warned. "He's running from humiliation." The searchers soon found evidence confirming Matthew's passage through the woods: a discarded motel keycard, a torn sleeve from a light jacket, and fresh footprints leading deeper into an undeveloped conservation area. The terrain was rugged: thick brush, rocky outcrops, and barely marked trails. Adding urgency to the manhunt, a hunter reported hearing a single gunshot echo from the eastern sector of the woods around 4 a.m. It wasn't clear whether it was a weapon Matthew carried or a sound unrelated to the fugitive. Regardless, protocols changed. Officers were ordered to wear body armor, and negotiations teams were put on standby. Meanwhile, investigators dug deeper into Matthew's background. They discovered that months before Laura's death, he had purchased a revolver at a gun show. Cash sale, no serial tracking. It was never registered, but now assumed to be in his possession. Rachel Monroe, still under protective custody, grew increasingly fearful. She recounted instances where Matthew had joked darkly about making problems disappear during arguments. These recollections, dismissed as gallows humor at the time, now sounded chillingly prophetic. By early afternoon, drone surveillance spotted a figure matching Matthew's description at the edge of a dried-up creek bed, moving erratically. Officers were redirected, but as they converged, the figure darted into a series of limestone caves known locally as the Hollows, a confusing, labyrinthine system of tunnels that had thwarted search efforts in the past. With daylight waning and the environment turning hostile, Holloway faced a critical decision: pursue immediately and risk chaotic confrontation inside the caves, or wait, contain the perimeter, and force Matthew into making a mistake under pressure. Every option carried risk. Every delay increased the chances of tragedy. By nightfall, the Hollows became a black maw swallowing sound and light. Temperatures inside dropped quickly, and visibility was nearly non-existent without advanced gear. Lieutenant Carla Mendoza, head of the tactical response team, advised against immediate entry. "He knows we're out here," she said. "Pushing in blind gives him every advantage." Instead, officers deployed motion sensors and heat-seeking drones at all major cave openings. A K-9 unit swept the perimeter. though scent tracking became nearly impossible in the cool, shifting airflow of the stone passages. Detective Holloway remained at the mobile command post, working with negotiators and cave specialists. A former spelunker who had explored the hollows decades earlier provided a crude, hand-drawn map showing choke points, natural dead ends, and water-drained tunnels. It was better than nothing. Meanwhile, FBI profiler Lance Mercer built a behavioral trap. If he thinks he's surrounded, he might reach out to someone. Not because he's confident, but because he's unraveling, Mercer said. An undercover officer with a voice similar to Rachel Monroe's recorded a message, calm, familiar, emotionally open. It was broadcast via loudspeakers at cave mouths on a loop. Hours passed. Just after 3 a.m., a sensor flagged movement in a tunnel near the southern edge. Teams converged silently. Through night vision scopes, officers spotted a figure huddled against the wall, gaunt, dirty, cradling something. He did not run. He didn't move at all. It was Matthew. He was alive, barely. A revolver lay beside him, unfired. His hands trembled as he surrendered. His voice was barely audible. "I thought I could fix it," he muttered. Paramedics confirmed he was dehydrated, possibly hypothermic, and had gone at least 2 days without food. Back at the precinct, Matthew gave no statement. His attorney arrived within the hour. He was booked on charges of first-degree murder, obstruction, and abuse of a corpse. No bail was granted. The hunt was over, but the trial was only beginning, and the real question now became, what would the court believe? A crime of passion? A premeditated plan? Or something far more manipulative, buried beneath a calm exterior and years of lies? Within 72 hours of Matthew's arrest, the Brookhaven County District Attorney's Office convened an emergency task force. The weight of public expectation was enormous. The DA, Patricia Levin, emphasized one goal in her meeting with the assembled team. "We will not let Laura Carter's life be reduced to a courtroom game." Prosecutors had an abundance of evidence, forensic, digital, testimonial, but it had to be meticulously presented. Holloway spent hours compiling a detailed timeline. Matthew's internet searches about body disposal, his purchases of cleaning supplies, the signs of a staged crime scene, and Rachel Monroe's sworn statement. Rachel's role remained delicate. Though granted limited immunity for cooperating, the defense was expected to attack her credibility aggressively. Prosecutors decided to frame Rachel as a manipulated participant, rather than a willing accomplice, supported by behavioral analyses from forensic psychologists. Meanwhile, Matthew's court-appointed legal team began signaling a possible defense: diminished capacity. Preliminary psychological evaluations requested by the defense suggested Matthew might attempt to claim he was mentally unstable at the time of Laura's death, overwhelmed by the collapse of his marriage and his obsession with Rachel. Detective Holloway viewed the strategy as a desperate move. Matthew's precise planning, weeks of research, calculated attempts to hide evidence, didn't fit the profile of someone in a dissociative break. Still, prosecutors prepared counters, expert witnesses ready to testify to Matthew's deliberate, methodical mindset. As jury selection loomed, Matthew's attorneys proposed a last-minute plea deal: second-degree murder in exchange for a guaranteed 40-year sentence, no possibility of parole. It was a risky offer, an implicit admission of guilt, but a bid to avoid a life sentence or death penalty exposure. The DA rejected it. Public trust demanded full accountability. The trial would proceed. Outside the courthouse, memorials for Laura grew daily. Candles, flowers, handwritten notes taped to the steps. The community had turned Laura from a name on a missing persons flyer into a symbol of broken trust, a reminder that evil could hide behind even the most ordinary faces. Inside the courtroom, rows of spectators gathered long before opening arguments. Some were family, some were curious onlookers, some were survivors of their own private losses, drawn to tragedy they could recognize, if not fully understand. Matthew Carter sat silently at the defense table, hands folded, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The trial of the man who once claimed his wife was simply missing was about to begin, and no one would emerge unchanged. Opening arguments commenced on a gray, overcast morning that seemed to mirror the gravity inside the courtroom. District Attorney Patricia Levin spoke first. She painted a vivid but controlled narrative. Matthew Carter had not acted in a moment of passion, but had meticulously planned Laura's death, researching disposal methods, purchasing cleaning supplies, manipulating his mistress into assisting him. Levin's voice, steady but heavy with restrained emotion, stressed one theme above all: betrayal. Laura Carter trusted the man sitting before you. She built a life with him, and he ended that life, not by accident, not in a moment of confusion, but with deliberate, chilling intent. The defense countered by describing Matthew as a man broken by pressures, trapped in a collapsing marriage, who had suffered a psychological break rather than plotted murder. His lead attorney, Joseph Crane, urged jurors to look past the forensic charts and digital timelines to the wounded man beneath, hinting that the state would portray Matthew as a monster to hide the complexities of real human emotion. The first witnesses took the stand: forensic specialists, investigators, crime scene technicians. Photographs of the Carter home were shown, luminol-lit images of bloodstains invisible to the naked eye, the drag marks from bedroom to garage, the receipts and browser histories detailing weeks of sinister preparation. The jury, a cross-section of Brookhaven Ridge's residents, shifted uncomfortably as the evidence mounted. Each item, each detail painted the same picture: careful, cold, methodical cruelty. Then came Rachel Monroe's testimony. Escorted nervously into the courtroom, Rachel avoided looking at Matthew. Her voice trembled at first, but grew firmer as she recounted the night Matthew arrived, the terror she felt, the veiled threats he made if she refused to help. Under direct examination, she was portrayed as a frightened woman caught in a web she didn't fully understand until it was too late. Cross-examination was brutal. The defense painted Rachel as a willing accomplice, suggesting she benefited emotionally and materially from Laura's death. They dissected inconsistencies in her earlier statements, highlighting gaps and moments of hesitation. Rachel fought to maintain composure, but the defense succeeded in planting seeds of doubt, not about Matthew's guilt, but about Rachel's reliability. Outside the courthouse, public opinion divided sharply. Some viewed Rachel as another of Matthew's victims. Others saw her as complicit, a silent partner to horror. Inside, the prosecution remained undeterred. They had no intention of letting the narrative slip Laura Carter's story they knew, risked being overshadowed if they lost control of it now. The defense opened its case with the testimony of Dr. Simon Greer, a forensic psychiatrist calm, methodical, and articulate. Greer explained to the jury that Matthew Carter had suffered from situational dissociative disorder, a supposed psychological fracture triggered by intense emotional pressure. Greer described Matthew as emotionally imploding, citing marital dissatisfaction, financial strain, and an unhealthy obsession with Rachel Monroe. According to Greer, Matthew's actions were not those of a cold planner, but of a man disconnected from rational thought at the time of the crime. He portrayed Matthew not as a monster, but as a tragic figure crumbling under internal chaos. The prosecution, anticipating this angle, moved swiftly to counter. On cross-examination, DA Patricia Levin pressed Dr. Greer on the inconsistency between Matthew's supposed dissociation and his meticulous preparations: the internet searches, the purchased supplies, the effort to stage Laura's disappearance. "How does a dissociated mind remember to padlock a freezer?" Levin asked sharply. Greer hesitated, and that hesitation was all the jury needed to see. The prosecution then called their own expert witness, Dr. Megan Shaw, who systematically dismantled the diminished capacity claim. Dr. Shaw emphasized that dissociation typically leads to disorganized, chaotic behavior, not methodical concealment of evidence or manipulation of others. Matthew Carter's actions were not the acts of a fractured mind, she concluded. They were the acts of someone fully aware of consequences, actively working to avoid them. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, a slow but noticeable shift in public mood began. Vigils for Laura grew larger. News outlets shifted focus from salacious details to humanizing Laura, her work at the hospital, her volunteer work with local shelters, the patients she had cared for. Inside the courtroom, closing arguments loomed. Holloway and the prosecution team spent long hours shaping a closing built around one core message: This was not a crime of confusion. This was a choice. Matthew Carter had chosen deceit over honesty, violence over separation, control over freedom. The prosecution prepared to bring the case home, fully aware that the defense's emotional framing still held some sway with jurors. No one could predict whether sympathy might cloud judgment, and a single juror's doubt could change everything. On the final morning of arguments, the courtroom buzzed with an electricity that hadn't been present during the procedural early days of the trial. Rows were packed with reporters, family members, and community figures. Even casual spectators seemed to hold their breath. The defense spoke first. Joseph Crane implored the jury to see Matthew as broken, not evil. He acknowledged the mistakes, the affair, the panic, the concealment, but insisted that Laura's death was not the result of cold calculation. It was, he argued, a tragic spiraling accident fueled by emotional collapse. Crane's voice rose with theatrical emotion as he painted Matthew not as a villain, but as a man abandoned by reason at the worst moment of his life. There was a pause, heavy and calculated, before the prosecution rose. District Attorney Levin approached the jury slowly, no notes in hand. Her voice was low but unwavering. She spoke not of legal definitions but of choices. Matthew's choice to strangle Laura instead of facing a divorce. His choice to store her body like discarded trash. His choice to run. His choice to lie. Levin gestured toward the enlarged photo of Laura, displayed quietly at the edge of the courtroom. She deserved choices, too, Levin said simply, and he took every single one of them away. The closing argument never raised its voice. It didn't need to. It cut with a sharper tool: shame, betrayal, irreversibility. When both sides finished, the judge issued final instructions and the jury withdrew. The waiting began. Hours stretched into an entire day, then 2. Tension thickened the courthouse air. Reporters camped outside, broadcasting live updates about every perceived movement inside the jury room. Detective Holloway and DA Levin reviewed possibilities. A prolonged deliberation usually indicated complexity, possibly disagreement, or struggle between emotional sympathy for Matthew and recognition of the brutal facts. Rachel Monroe, still under protective watch, refused all interview requests. She had become an unwilling public figure, the woman who had helped hide the crime, though she would never serve time. On the third morning of deliberations, word came. The jury had reached a verdict. Inside the courtroom, silence reigned as everyone stood. Matthew Carter, pale and expressionless, rose beside his attorney. For the first time, his mask of control seemed to waver, a slight tremor in his right hand. The foreperson handed the folded verdict slip to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. A final, breathless moment passed. The judge unfolded the paper, scanned it, and read aloud. On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant, Matthew Carter, guilty. Gasps filled the room. Some wept quietly. Holloway felt the pressure ease from her chest for the first time in months. But it wasn't over yet. The sentence had yet to be determined, and whether Matthew would finally show remorse remained an open, haunting question. The sentencing hearing convened 1 week after the verdict. This time, the courtroom atmosphere was different, less frenetic, heavier. There was no longer a question of guilt, only the question of punishment remained. Victim impact statements began the proceedings. Laura's sister, Karen, stood trembling before the court, clutching a photo of Laura as a teenager, laughing, full of life, far from the cold morgue table where police had found her. She trusted him, Karen said through gritted teeth. She built a home with him, and he reduced her to something he could store in a freezer like garbage. He didn't just kill her, he erased her. One by one, friends, co-workers, even old patients Laura had once cared for came forward, piecing together a portrait of the woman stolen from them. There were no angry shouts, no calls for vengeance, just grief, layered thick across every word. When given the opportunity to speak, Matthew Carter rose. The courtroom leaned forward collectively. This was the moment, the last chance for remorse, for acknowledgement, for humanity. But Matthew's voice, when it came, was hollow. "I'm sorry things happened the way they did," he said simply, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Not once did he say Laura's name. Not once did he admit what he had done. Detective Holloway, watching from the back, felt no satisfaction, only a grim confirmation that the man before them The man who had killed out of selfishness and cowardice was incapable of true remorse. Judge Miriam Donnelly delivered the sentence without flourish: life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. "Your actions were not those of a broken man," she said. "They were the actions of a man who made choices, and you will live with the consequences of those choices for the rest of your life." Matthew Carter was led away in cuffs, his face unreadable. Rachel Monroe entered witness protection soon after sentencing, relocated under a new identity. Her name remained a divisive subject in Brookhaven Ridge, but her role in securing justice, however flawed, could not be denied. In the months that followed, a scholarship fund was established in Laura Carter's name for nursing students. Every year, the town gathers on the anniversary of her death, not to relive her murder, but to remember her kindness, her service, her life. Brookhaven Ridge eventually resumed its rhythms: school runs, town fairs, late-night diners, but something in its foundation remained cracked. An invisible reminder that evil often wears an ordinary face, speaks in a familiar voice, and sits across the dinner table without ever revealing itself, until it is far too late.